The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show. Lewis, I think we need to talk about Wikileaks. And I need to warn you right now, I know that it is bad. I'm told it's bad for programs, radio and TV shows, political shows, when you don't take a completely certain opinion on one side or the other. But honestly, there is much room for me to be convinced about whether this latest Wikileaks dump of about 250,000 American diplomatic cables is a good thing or a bad thing. Now, if you don't know what diplomatic cables are, they are messages, not coded messages, but certainly messages sent with in a certain shorthand in many cases between different embassies and other government organizations around the world. And in many cases, they are very candid. In many cases, they are very direct. And in many cases, they don't go along with what is in the public discourse between countries. In other words, the United States may have a certain public opinion about Afghanistan's leader, but the cables sent between diplomats could indicate that a different opinion is the reality. Is that a fair assessment, Lewis?
Sure.
So I say first, let's hear from WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange about why they did it. And then we can get into, well, exactly what is it that is in some of these leaked documents and what are we to think about it? Let's take a listen. And I apologize for the video. This is video of Julian Assange. If you're going to see this, the audio is not bad, addressing via webcam a conference of journalists somewhere from an undisclosed location.
There has been more leaked prosecutions of media sources under the Obama administration than all previous presidents combined. So that is a highly unusual and concerning shift by the Obama administration into a regime that doesn't believe in the freedom of the press and doesn't act like it believes it. It understands that we are a responsible organization. So it's trying to make it as hard for us as possible to publish responsibly, in the hope that it can get us to not publish anything at all. Because not publishing anything at all would mean not publishing the abuses by that organization.
Okay, so Julian Assange making a number of different points. There he is saying the abuses that are going on are so significant, and there is so much of an effort taking place to suppress that information getting out, that he felt it a duty and that it is responsible for WikiLeaks to publish these documents. Now, there's a number of different things. There's so many of these documents. I started randomly just clicking around and looking at some of them, and the reality is most of them aren't of any interest. I didn't have time to go through all 250,000. I apologize. If I had an extra 5 minutes to prepare, I could have gotten through all the documents and I could have them all for you here. What other organizations have suggested, Lewis, are the interesting things included in these diplomatic cables that have been leaked. A number of different things. The Guardian says interesting from these leaks are Arab leaders are privately urging an airstrike on Iran. U.S. officials are being instructed to spy on the leadership of the United Nations. There's alleged links between the Russian government and organized crime. I didn't know that was an unknown. There's devastating criticism of British military operations in Afghanistan and claims of inappropriate behavior by a member of the British royal family. Okay. When I first read that, I said, I'm not really seeing anything new here, but certainly this removes a certain level of deniability. Right? In other words, when you have these cables made public, you can't say, well, that's what we think they think, but we don't have proof. So that's stage one. What's your reaction there?
I don't know. I mean, what
you don't see it as particularly damning of anybody so far?
It's not. I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's surprising. I mean, these leaks come out from time to time. And
well, I'll get to more, and we'll see if your opinion changes. Now, yesterday I tried to log on to WikiLeaks, and there was I just couldn't get on, and it turns out there was a denial of service attack going on, and that made a little bit of headlines, but they persevered. The website is back up. So here's some other points that were made. The U.S. is worried about loose nuclear materials in Pakistan, but they can't do much about it. Number 2, American leaders are thinking about an eventual collapse of North Korea and hoping China will accept a reunified peninsula. Washington is bargaining with allies to empty the Guantanamo prison. There are suspicions of corruption in the Afghan government. I'm just not reading about anything that wasn't either known or very, very simply deduced from the information that was public so far.
Right.
Rich Saudis are still funding al-Qaeda. Big surprise. Syria arms Hezbollah, but lies about it.
Right. I mean, so far from what we're reading, I think if anyone finds any of this shocking, they've probably been living under a rock for many years.
That's literally the language that a lot of articles are saying. If anybody is shocked by some of these leaks, then they must have already been living under a rock. Now, Iran smuggling arms to Hezbollah on ambulances is an interesting story. But again, is it worth the risk here? And if you ask, well, what is the risk? There are a number of risks here. Some people are going way too far. For example, Republican Congressman Peter King is calling for Wikileaks to be classified as a terrorist organization. That to me is absurd. What isn't absurd, though, is to at least have the discussion. Could these documents endanger the lives of people around the world? Forget about just would it endanger the lives of Americans. The obvious question is, are these documents being released with key sensitive names redacted? WikiLeaks insists that yes, they are. In this set of cables, I don't actually know if sensitive names were redacted. I know in the previous leak, there were a number of names that were cut out, but others saying you're giving enough information where these people could be identified by those that don't know that they are actually providing information to the U.S., for example. So there is that risk, number one. Now, you could argue that risk is worth it. That risk is worth it because of what is being uncovered here. The Guardian says the cables name countries involved in financing terror groups and describe a near-environmental disaster last year over a rogue shipment of enriched uranium. That is not a worthless piece of information. But the question I ask is it worth the risk to those that it may pose a risk to, given that that piece of information was probably already within the scope of what we could assume?
Right. These are pretty vague. And of course, these are leaks. This is already known information, just not known to the public. So I fail to see how these are matters of security, how this would affect security anywhere. I really doubt it.
I don't know about that. I can see the argument. Now,
I mean,
again,
just from this example we have here, just from the ones you picked out.
Okay. Regardless, on the other side of the coin, Lewis, to say WikiLeaks is a terrorist organization would be completely bogus. WikiLeaks is not terrorizing anybody, based on the definition. And for Peter King to go that far, we're familiar with Peter King, though. It's really no surprise that he is choosing to go that far. He has a long history of exaggerating claims and saying things for attention. So honestly, let's not even mention Peter King anymore. WikiLeaks is not a terrorist organization. The question is, by releasing these documents, which they obtained from others, including possibly U.S. Army Private First Class Bradley Manning, an intelligence analyst who was arrested in June and charged regarding an earlier leak. The question is, are we really doing more good than harm by releasing these? State Department legal advisor Harold Koh said the publication of the cables would place at risk the lives of countless innocent individuals, place at risk ongoing military operations, and place at risk ongoing cooperation between countries. Reasonable people can disagree about that. Then we get a fascinating story. And the story is about trying to suppress the prosecution of American interrogators in Germany. And this is really a fascinating story. There is a man, this is the al-Masri case. There is an individual whose name is Khaled El-Masri, E-L. And he was actually picked up and taken to one of these CIA black sites in Afghanistan from Macedonia because his name is similar to a supposed terrorist, Khalid al-Masri. So slightly different spelling of Khaled, and A-L versus E-L. Turns out he's just a greengrocer, not a terrorist at all. He was extraordinarily rendered to Afghanistan on the assumption that he was the al-Qaeda guy. He was tortured. He was stripped naked. He was beaten. He was given an enema tranquilizer Sounds unpleasant. He was put on a ghost plane for Afghanistan via Baghdad. He was put in one of these, they call them salt pits, these black sites, deprived food, deprived drinkable water. He claims to have been sodomized. Local CIA agents decided that his passport might actually be genuine. They might have kidnapped and tortured the wrong person. The passport was sent to Langley, where they also concluded it was genuine. Instead of releasing him, they continued to detain him. And then eventually he is dumped without his passport, without his papers, without money, on a remote road in Albania, Lewis. Maybe hoping that bandits would find him and kill him. He is actually caught by Albanian police. They believe his story. And they send him back to, they accept that he was a German. Then the cover-up starts. It is going to turn into a political scandal in Germany. Germany does a criminal investigation. There is going to be, it's going to go public. There is going to be prosecution. And the United States, we see through these cables, is influencing Germany not to prosecute. This is one story, and I understand, is 250,000 documents being leaked, possibly putting people in danger worth it for this one story? Not for this one story. But if these types of things are going on, certainly there is a responsibility by journalists and others who have access to make these instances public, is there not?
There is. There definitely is. And like you said, we couldn't go through all of these and find out if names have been removed or specific information has been removed.
But if there is evidence that there are a lot of these types of stories, should we not hear them?
We should, absolutely.
So you say that this release is not evidence of terrorist activity by WikiLeaks, and that this is this adding in general to the public knowledge and to the public discourse, or in general are these massive document releases doing more harm than good? Bottom line, I mean, what do you think? Regardless of whether they're legal, regardless of how they were obtained, once the media gets them, releasing them and making them public, positive, negative?
Positive, absolutely 100% positive.
I'm not convinced. I just don't know. I really am. I wish I could I'd be much more compelling if I could just take one side of this and criticize the other, but I really can see both sides of this.
Well, in terms of being called terrorist activity, I think that term is used far too loosely.
I don't see that side. I'm not saying that, just in terms of more harm or good.
Good thing, good thing. People just don't know what's going on behind closed doors, and this gives us a little peek into what's going on. And as far as we can tell, no harm has come of it. And we're not citing any older stories of harm coming of this.
Julian Assange has said, no, there are no specific instances where any harm has come to anybody. And until I have not read of any. If there are any, please present them.
And no older instances which we can bring up in which harm has come of these.
The David Pakman Show is made possible by listeners like you and by Greenfield Savings Bank, building a strong community one account at a time, with neighborhood offices in Greenfield, Amherst, Conway, Shelburne Falls, South Deerfield, and Turners Falls, and online at greenfieldsavings.com. By the Daily Hampshire Gazette and GazetteNet.com, connecting our communities with local news and information. By DIF Design, specializing in custom business websites at DIFdesign.com. Find out more about underwriting The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.